What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 games that I 100% but never got around to actually reviewing. As that type of review has become pretty much a staple of the channel at this point, people often ask me why or how that's sustainable, and one of the reasons I will tell them is usually because this is something I was doing long before those reviews, and many of the games on this list are a reflection of that, with a couple of others thrown in just for fun, but as I've expressed a few times here and there, I don't really feel like I've gotten my money out of a game until I've done everything you can do. So while I didn't always have the sheer amount of time, since I'm doing this as my full-time job these days, it is still something I strove for even back then. So the reason I didn't review many of these is simply because I wasn't doing reviews at the time, though in one case that's about to change. Because recently I've been going through the Witcher series for reviews, simply because it's a series that I love and it was about time I got around to it for the channel, I suppose. But as I've mentioned in basically all of those videos, it's a series that I am incredibly familiar with. So the process for those reviews has been more about gathering footage than doing anything else, as it's pretty much already done, which is the case for The Witcher 3. I spent about 350 hours over the course of a few years, actually, getting 100% on this game, and I finished it up in, I believe, 2019, which makes it, of course, the first title on our list. Now, realistically, I do plan on reviewing this one relatively soon. I don't have an exact timeline, but likely sometime this year. But much of that review is just going to be playing through the game again, mostly to gather footage, as I've pretty much done everything else already. But one thing that I will say about it is that I think it lost some of the storytelling potential of the first two. While I do agree The Witcher 3 is an amazing game, in the process of getting 100%, you will start to notice a lot of repetition and things like the game loop. Many of the world markers are just kind of the same stuff repeated over and over again, and eventually you'll get to a point where they don't even offer a reward for you anymore, really. And I think it's going to be fun to parse a lot of that stuff for a review, because while it is a game that I love, it's not one that I've actually sat down and tried to objectively go over in that manner. And seeing how my previous two Witcher reviews at this point have already been about an hour each, I'm curious how that pans out for The Witcher 3. All of that said, though, we can finally move on to our second entry. In a slightly different direction, we have the Technomancer. If you're unfamiliar with this game, that would be unsurprising to me, as it is a relatively niche title from many years ago, 2016 to be specific, but it is from Spiders, the developer behind Greedfall, a much more well-known title. However, Technomancer really grabbed me with its world. We play a Technomancer, of course, living with other human beings on Mars. The radiation present on the planet has turned some people into mutants who are treated as second-class citizens, and the big secret of the Technomancers that they tell you right at the beginning of the game is that the Technomancers themselves are in fact mutants. They just happen to have mutated in a way that makes them useful to the rest of the world and allows them to manipulate electricity. However, this power and their social status obviously puts them in the crosshairs of powerful people who would use that secret against them, and that is kind of the central plot to the Technomancer, all while navigating a very alien planet, kind of literally, and fighting some creatures along the way. So overall, honestly, pretty great game. I did really enjoy it. And I even made a video on it many years ago, but I wouldn't really call it a review so much as just a general gameplay video. I think I got like 200 views or something like that, but nonetheless, a very cool title. That does bring us to number 3 on the list though, and this is the narrative adventure, The Wolf Among Us. If you've watched the channel a lot, you'll know that I love a good narrative game, and The Wolf Among Us definitely scratches that itch, as we take control of Bigby Wolf in the setting of the Fables comic book series, which sees a bunch of fables brought into the modern world just trying to get by, solving their own problems, and if you couldn't tell by the name, we play as the Big Bad Wolf, all while trying to keep the rest of the fables in line while we investigate a murder mystery. Overall, though, a pretty great narrative. I don't want to talk about it too much because spoiling the narrative spoils the game, but it really is a fantastic narrative game, one of my favorites. There's supposed to be a sequel in the works, and if it ever actually gets a firm release date, I might wind up reviewing this one at some point. But this title originally released all the way back in 2013. I personally got the 100% on it in 2014, so it's been quite some time, and it has certainly made an impression on me, which is why I'm talking about it almost a decade later, which means that second game is definitely going to have some big shoes to fill. But we are going to be moving right along to our fourth entry with a very interesting shift in direction via Betrayal at Club Low. Honestly, I'd be surprised if a lot of people had heard of this game, so if you know what that game is, congratulations. But this is a relatively recent game actually, from 2022, and it is truly one of the more bizarre games I've ever played. It is from Cosmo D Studios, who is known for this type of game, but basically what we're trying to do is, taking the role of a special agent, rescue someone who has been sort of trapped in a nightclub that once served as a coffin factory. However, if you couldn't tell by what's going on screen, this takes place via dice rolls. However, what we're rolling is pizza dice. We'll be able to cook pizzas and adjust these dice accordingly, which will then affect our rolls that we'll roll in various conversation and perform skill checks with, which will ultimately decide the fate of our infiltration and escape attempt, leading to one of many endings. This is a pretty short game. I 100%ed it in about 7 hours, and I did do a sort of checkout video for it, and the reason I never really bothered to review it was simply that there just wasn't much more to add that video didn't cover, and I wound up getting the 100% simply because the just sort of absurd nature of this game really drew me in, and I kind of just wanted to play more of it just to see what kind of wacky things I could get up to. So while it's kind of a weird game to recommend to people, it is certainly a memorable one, if nothing else. That, though, brings us to our final entry, and this is PowerWash Simulator. And the reason I didn't review it is pretty self-apparent, as the entire game is just you power washing things, and there's really not much more to say than that. But nonetheless, we're going to say some more. So PowerWash Simulator is just very relaxing. Say what you will about the rest of the game, but they've kind of nailed that gameplay loop in a manner that almost turns the game into like ASMR, and it becomes very satisfying to go through and, of course, power wash everything. And since the game is released, they've put out all sorts of DLC, bringing in other video game characters into it, such as power washing Lara Croft's house. There was even a bit of Final Fantasy VII crossover with like mechs and stuff. So they've done a lot of, let's say, interesting things with it. But after making a video for the game's release, I was kind of pulled into the sort of very relaxing nature of the gameplay loop. And while it might seem silly, it was enough for me to go through and just finish everything the game had to offer, which was well worth it because while you wouldn't think so, the game does actually have a main story that goes to some pretty bizarre places that are of course filthy and need a good power wash. But all of that said, that has been 5 games that I 100% but never really bothered to review for one reason or another. In some cases, I just didn't feel they needed a review. In others, it was simply years ago, back before I was doing the reviews themselves. Due to the way I approach games, there were quite a few, and believe it or not, there's actually still probably about a dozen more of these, so at some point in the future I might talk about it again. But that is going to be all for today, so I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.